We're glad to see this turnout for today's program. Residents Present is going to showcase the experiences, talents, backgrounds, and careers of our residents. And we have a very select group of residents here. It's been my pleasure as program chairman to look for future presenters. So far we've had lawyers, entrepreneurs, physicians, judges, scientists, philanthropists, and world travelers present here. And if you know of someone, or if you'd like to volunteer yourself to present, please let us know. We're always looking for new talent. Today we've landed a big fish. George Berkowitz, the man who created Legal Seafoods. He doesn't need an introduction, but I don't know of anyone here who has not eaten at Legal Seafoods. I ate at the original one in Inman Square and have been at many others since. I'm not going to say any more because George is going to tell us about his journey to where he is. Without any further ado, I present George Berkowitz.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And when you're talking about the people who are going to speak here, one thing you didn't mention about fishmongers. I'm a fishmonger and I'm a restaurateur. And I'll tell you something, it couldn't have been a better business for us to go into. It's been a great education. We've met more people. It's the only business I know of where you meet hundreds of people every day. We employ people in every restaurant, 100, 120 people, and that's where the education comes from. After a while, you start to judge quality. And my wife and I often talk about it. And one more thing, somebody had me ask the question, why do you call it legal? I'm not telling anybody. That goes back to very simple. My father, I had a wonderful father. He had a meat market and grocery store at Inman Square in Cambridge from the early 1900s. A very unusual man. He had a love affair with my mother. Every Sunday they went to the Toll House in Whitman. And during the week he took her up at Chinese food 2 or 3 times. Just a great affair, love affair. And my father, he ran a meat market and grocery store, and I said, quality-wise, if it wasn't prime meat, he wouldn't sell it. That's the kind of things he did. After the war, I was in the Marine Corps. I went to work for my father for a few years, buying meat. And he sent me over one day, he sent me over to Somerville, and he ought to get some lamb's livers. And he said, get kosher lamb livers. I said, Dad, kosher lamb livers? Our trade is Irish. He said, kosher lamb livers. And that's what I bought, and there was a reason for it. There's this idea about quality. A rabbi would not stamp a liver kosher if it had a blemish. I had to pay extra money for the lamb's livers that my father sold because that's how fussy he was. And that's where we got our experience in the food business, quality. And the word legal, the question was asked, why legal? It's kind of interesting. Does anybody have any idea why it's called legal? I think you probably don't, never mind. It's called legal because my father, when he started his business, gave out stamps. And when he filled a book with stamps, he got a prize. The name of the stamps was legal stamps. And somehow my father called the market legal cash market. And his reputation was so great that when we opened up the fish market next door, we wanted everybody to know that legal cash market was affiliated with legal seafood. So that's where the word legal comes from. Everybody thinks maybe I was a lawyer and flunked out of law school. No. There's nothing to it, just the relationship between my fathers and the legal was so great. I want to talk a little bit about, I was doing a little research on what I was going to talk about. Do I get paid for this? Yeah, I never my record. Forget it. Don't need to, right? I came across some writings that I did maybe 30, 40 years ago and talked about my childhood. What I'd like to do is just read this one page. That's the only, I promise you, the only page I'm going to read is this one page. This is what he wrote. My mother. Like a blink of the eye, my mother said, that to me was when I was very young. Life goes by like a blink of the eye, and so it does. They say that memories of your childhood are imprinted on your brain. Smashing my sister's piggy bank against the wall of the baker school when I was 8 years old, spending the money on candy at this variety store on Walk Hill Street, watching the 4th of July parade, standing by while my brother Stanley was hit and spanked for breaking the piggy bank. Being punished when my mother found out it was me. Life goes by like a blink of the eye. And she was so right. My high school days were happy days. Football, baseball, track, captain of the football team, all Boston football team in the Boston Globe. Is this all right to talk about this project? See how good I am. In the Boston Globe. Captain of the football team in my senior year, on the senior relay team, catcher on the baseball team. Never studied very hard, just made it by. But my mentor, one of my mentors, the reason I want to go back to high school, was an Irish man by the name of Tom Campbell. Tom Campbell was my high school homeroom teacher. His father was superintendent of the schools in the 1930s. And Tom was captain, was the coach of the football team, the baseball team, the track team. In those days, they had just one coach, and Tom was it. And I remember when he taught me something I never forgot. We were playing one of the Boston teams, and we were losing. And being 16 years old and losing is very traumatic. And Tom came over to me and said, "What's wrong, Berkey?" He called me Berkey, he never called me George, it's Berkey. And he said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Coach," I said, "we've got a better team and we're losing." He put his hand, I could feel his hand on my shoulder. And it was Tom. He said, "I want to tell you something, it's important winning, isn't it?" I looked at him, I thought he was crazy. Of course winning is important. What's more important? Is there something more important? I said, "Coach, what's more important?" He says, "How you played the game." And I remember that, and I never forgot Tom. And I play my personal life and our business life. It's how we play the game, the way it should be played. And I think all this goes back to Tom Campbell, sweet guy. I want to talk a little bit about when I was 17 years old. World War II broke out December 7th, Pearl Harbor, and I was 17 years old. And an entire year, 1942, I wanted to go into the service. My oldest brother, Leonard, joined the Navy. He was a lieutenant commander in the Navy, stationed on a ship in the North Atlantic. An airplane, they called it an airplane tender. In those days, the planes landed on the water, and the airplane tender took care of the refueling and taking care of the ship. My other brother, Stanley, was a non-commissioned officer in the Seabees, construction battalion, Seabees. And I was 17, I went to my mother. I said, "I want to join the Marine Corps." And my mother said, "No, I don't want you to join, it's too dangerous." But she was a very unusual woman. She turned around and she waited a few seconds, she said, "But George, if I don't want you to join the Marine Corps and you join the Army and anything happens to you, I would never forgive myself." She signed the note saying I could join. So I joined what they call the V-12 officer training program up at Dartmouth. And I went to Dartmouth, and I was up at Dartmouth for 2 years in the Marine Corps. And I got really straightened out the very first week I was at Dartmouth. Everybody knows about the Marine Corps. The drill instructors are the toughest SOBs in the world. That's what they want to be. They want to make sure that if you give orders, you can take orders. And this guy, we were out in front of one of the dormitories, and we're all lined up. And he was straightening us out and stand in one straight line, make sure your chest is up and your head back. And then he gave the order, right face. I did a left face. And all of a sudden I realized, and I turned around, in the proper position, and he came over to me and he said, "Berkowitz?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You're the dumbest son of a bitch I ever met." And for a week I thought I was. But that was my indoctrination into the Marine Corps. We took courses at Dartmouth, and I said there were two courses that we all wanted to get into. Now, we flunked out of Dartmouth. We didn't go home to Mommy and Daddy. We went down to Paris Island and overseas into combat. It was a very difficult time. There were two professors who all wanted to get into their classes because they never flunked anybody. The two professors had their reputation. Louis Berkowitz was one. He taught education 10, I think it was. And we got into his classroom the very first day. There were 40 of us in there. And Louis turned around and he said, "Gentlemen, welcome." There were no women at Dartmouth at the time during the first part of the war. "The gentlemen, welcome." He said, "You're going to learn just one thing this semester." You could hear a sigh of relief. One thing. What was he going to teach us? How to think. And he did. That entire semester, we read controversial books. We talked about controversial editorials. It was a real education, and I mean education, about thinking. And it's interesting because I thought it was a great idea. A few years later, I had an appointment at lunch with one of the presidents of one of the universities. And my idea was, maybe I could suggest they have a class, much like Louis' class, think, think, think. So we had lunch, and we're finishing up, and this president of the university, I won't say which one, I turned around and I said, "Why don't we have a class like Louis' class?" He didn't say anything. He looked up at me and said, "George," I said, "What is it?" He said, "How old are you?" He was looking for money. That was the end of the conversation, and they've never done anything about it. And I think it's kind of sad, because that's exactly what these young men and women coming from high school into college need. They've got to be able to tell the young women about smoking, about sex, about all the things that are important in this time of their lives, the men and girls. But that was the end of it, and I just let it go at that. I've got my son here today. If I forget anything, or if I stop talking, he said he'd come up here and help me. You sure?
Sure.
All right, yeah. My military service, when I got out of Dartmouth, I went down to Paris Island boot camp, then went up to Camp Lejeune, pre-OCS, and then up to Quantico, Officer Candidate School. And I had a week to go to graduation. That's not a long time. I had a friend of mine that had 1 day to go, and they flunked out. He spent 3 years training to become an officer in the Marine Corps, and the day before he graduated, he was gone because the drill instructor didn't like the way he was handling the troops. And then a week before graduation, I had a week to go, and I had my gold bars. Spent 3 years working on it. And we're out in the field about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't have a job that day. The drill instructor came over and yelled, "Berkowitz." Oh, "Yes, sir." He said, "Your commanding officer and executive officer have just been killed. Take over." This was my final exam. And I wasn't paying much attention because it wasn't my day. And I sat down and I thought about Louis Berkowitz. Think, think, think. And I did. I sat down and I developed a plan, base of fire, envelop on the left, starting at a certain time. It was successful. A week later, I graduated and had my gold bars. And it goes back to Louis Berkowitz. Think, think, think. And I think this goes back not only for your personal life, but for your business life. In 1950, a decided, well, I tell you, I have a cousin of mine, Gus Cohen, who was the meat buyer for Stop and Shop. And my brother Leonard, my oldest brother, was the head meat man for all of Marriott hotels. To give you an idea, and Gus came to me one day and he said, George, I was working for my father. He said, you should open up a fish market. I said, look down here. Everybody in the family's in the meat business, he wants me to open a fish market. So I did. And it was interesting, Aristotle said something 2,500 years ago. He said, you want to be successful? Make good decisions and be lucky. Well, he said it. I think it takes a little more than luck. I think luck helps, there's no question about it. But it was interesting what he said, because when I opened up this fish market, I was always selling fresh fish, and I had no idea how to do it. He had a little fish cutter smitty, and he taught me everything I know. And it was interesting because how things work out, luck. One day a gentleman came in, and he was Japanese. He was getting his master's at Harvard. And he came over to me and he said, you know, the Japanese like fresh fish, sashimi. He said, why don't you work on that? I said, if you help me out, I'll do it. And he did. He gave me some direction on how to handle fish for the Japanese trade. And that's one of the reasons the quality of our fish has been so good. And then, not only that, but we had my wife and I would travel down to New York and pick up things like bean cake. Nobody carried bean cake around in Boston, tofu. And we opened up eventually a little Oriental food store. And we were the only ones around that carried this product. It was a wonderful experience for us. And I think that's one of the reasons, as Aristotle said, make good decisions and be lucky. And this gentleman, the strange part about it is recently, because it was last year, 2 years ago, we got a letter from the Japanese people that they were coming, 150 business people were coming across America, looking at different American businesses. And they knew about legal seafood going back to the days the Japanese gentleman helped us give us some direction with raw fish. They came to our restaurant and took the entire second floor, 150, our entire second floor, harbor side, and they had a lunch there. And it all goes back to the gentleman that gave us direction on sashimi and how to handle it. What did Aristotle say? Make good decisions and be lucky. He was right. Well, we opened up the fish market, and I met my wife Harriet, and we dated on the way home. I used to go out, she lived in Belmont, we lived in Newton. On the way home from work, for 3 months in a row, every night I dropped off to say Harriet. We were much in love. One day, I stayed in the reserves, Marine Corps. One day I received a letter from the Marine Corps saying, Mr. Berkowitz, you're being invited back during the Korean War. You report to Camp Lejeune, and there's a company that's there alerted to shipping for flying to Korea for combat. And I just met Harriet. We were, as I say, we were much in love. So I went to Harriet. You know what a force sweaty is? I went to Harriet, and I said, Harriet, I can call back. I said, let's get engaged or go steady. She said, no. I said, well, what? She said, I don't know how long you're going to be gone. I said, let's get married. She said, yes. Isn't that a forced wedding? My son was married. I was born 12 months later, by the way, sorry. No. But what happened was I went down to North Carolina to join this red hot infantry company. And it was a red hot one. I mean, the captain of this company was perfect. And I walked up to the company this one day when I arrived, and I was out of the Marine Corps 4 or 5 years. I gained about 20 pounds. I needed a haircut. My uniform didn't fit. And I walked in front of this captain. I guess he took one look at me, he almost fainted. About a week later, I got new orders. I was being shipped out to Quantico, Virginia, to go to weapons school, officers' weapons school up at Quantico. And that's what Harry and I did for 1 year. I was up to Quantico, going to school, to ordnance school and weapons school. And then we went back down to division, down to Camp Lejeune. And for 1 year, we traveled back and forth. I tell everybody we had, our honeymoon was 1 year. Wasn't bad. But it was a great experience. And after a year, I was discharged. I tell a story about China. There's one thing I wanted to talk about. When I went to China, I got orders to go to China after I graduated OCS. And it was interesting because my orders were, the 1st Marine Division was in North China, repatriating Japanese and Koreans. And my orders were to go down to San Diego, and then over to Hawaii, and then from Hawaii to Guam, and Guam to Taku in China. There was something else, I tell you. When I went to San Diego and I took a troop ship to Hawaii, and then I got orders to go from Hawaii to Guam, and I got my bag packed, and I went down to the harbor, and there was no ship there. I said, either I didn't hear properly, or they didn't give me the right orders. So I went back to the office, and I said, I'm supposed to be going, cruising to Guam. I said, there's nothing there. He said, yes, there is. What are you talking about? He said, LCIs, there were 20 landing craft infantry. They weren't made for crossing oceans. They were made for landing on enemy shores. And everybody, they're round bottom, so when they're on the water, they're like corks. There were 20 LCIs with about 20 individuals on each boat and 1 officer. How long do you think it took to get from Pearl Harbor to Guam? Oh. Any idea? A month. We were on these little boats for a month, you can imagine. And not only that, as I say, they were flat bottom, it was like corks, and then when they cooked, you could smell every quarter. That's all I smelled was burning food. But you know something? I think when you're young, you handle most of this without saying it. You really do. We did. We handled it. We got to Guam. We stayed in Guam for about a month, and we got a cruise ship, a hospital ship to Taku. Taku is the port for Tianjin, Beijing, up in North China. And we landed in Taku and Tianjin's upriver, maybe 50, 60 miles upriver, so it had to be trucked up. You land at Taku, the trucks come down, pick you up to Tianjin. And what they do is that when we landed there were maybe 100, 150 enlisted men. They were picked up immediately, brought to Tianjin. There were about 20 officers waiting for the return trucks to bring us back to Tianjin. And I'll tell you, we came from Guam where the temperature was 90 to Tianjin where the temperature was probably close to 30. We had winter gear, but I'll tell you, we were freezing our butt offs. One of the officers, young second lieutenant, opened his locker box and took out some bottles of liquor. Within a very short time, there were 20 slightly drunk officers. And we figured we'd go up to Tianjin, sleep it off, and the next day. We didn't know. The trucks came down, picked us up, took us to headquarters for assignment all over North China. 20 slightly drunk officers being assigned by a lieutenant colonel. You can imagine it must have been a hell of a scene. He finally got to me, and shows you Alice Throttle, to make good choices and be lucky. He came over to me and he said, Berkowitz, and I said, yes, sir. He looked down and he said, wait a minute. He said, Chinese language. You took Chinese? I said, yes, sir. I was the only one that spoke any Chinese. And all I could do was, ni hao ma, how are you? One, yi, euro, san, so I could count from 1 to 10. I got the best job in North China. Because I took that 1 semester at Dartmouth. And I tell you something, I've got to find out something from my grandson. I'm not sure I can answer it now. My grandson was taking Chinese at Boston University, I believe. And he came to me and he said, Grandpa, do you remember any Chinese? And I said, yes, I do. He said, say something in Chinese. I said, Jagga Shading Hao Xiao Xie. And he looked at me and he went hysterical. He was laughing. I said, what the hell are you laughing at? you know what you just said? I said, no. What did you just say? I said, you were a very nice young girl. He said, no. He said, you said you were a very nice young prostitute. His sense of humor was like his father's. I'm not sure to this day whether he was kidding me or not. Well, we're in China, and the interesting part about my Chinese experience was one of the first, we went in Shenzhen, and one of the first days I was there, a gentleman walked up to me and hugged me. He was a Russian Jew, and he wanted to thank us for freeing them, for the end of the war, winning the war. Well, you can imagine. And at the time in China, there were a lot of Jews in Shanghai, maybe 20,000. The Japanese built a ghetto down in, I think it was Shanghai. And so this fellow, Freddie Sodomus, was living in Tianjin. That's where we were stationed. I said, well, it must have been difficult for you, Freddie. He said, no. I said, what do you mean, no? He said, the Japanese general in charge at Tianjin, Shenzhen, allowed us to go free for the entire war. He said, I was in business, making money, I was free to go to temple. I said, how could this possibly happen? And this actually was. And it goes back to the situation. I want to ask somebody a question. You can raise your hand. Can anybody remember the word fugu? Ever see the word fugu? No, you're out of this. It's a book, the Fugu Plan. All right? Now, the Fugu Plan, it's a strange thing because most Jews don't understand what it was. And yet it's a very important thing. In the 1930s, the Japanese took over Manchuria, called Manchukuo. And they didn't have enough people, enough money to develop that area. They knew it was very rich, and they could make a lot of money in it if they could settle it as Japanese. What they wanted to do is get Jews from all over the world to come to Manchuria, to settle there, to bring their money, to develop it, and they would reap the harvest. They called it the Fugu Plan. Fugu sounds like a swear word, doesn't it? The Fugu Plan, let me explain what it's called, Fugu Plan. The fugu is a Japanese fish, probably the finest Japanese fish you can buy, except there's a portion of it is the most poisonous, the worst poison in the world. If they don't remove this poison from the fugu, it can kill you. So the word Fugu Plan in the 1930s was similar to what they're talking about with this wonderful Japanese fish. The idea was the plan to bring the Jews from all over the world to Manchuria was like the Japanese, great idea. And yet, it was almost, what it contained was the poison that the fugu fish had. The plant could have a poison and affect everybody. But that's basically, if you ever want a book, you want to read a wonderful book, an educational book, The Fugu Plan, it's by Marvin Tokaya and Mary Schwartz. And the interesting part about it, the reason I found it so interesting, I didn't realize how many Jews lived in Japan. You don't even know any Jews that lived in Japan? No, yeah. See, that's an interesting point. And yet there were a lot of Jews not only living in Japan, but living in China. So when I read this and people talked about it, it was amazing to me. It was a real revelation. And that's why we're sitting here today. We're learning things we never knew, I hope. I was in charge, what I had in China, it's kind of interesting, on the repatriation section. The repatriation section of the 1st Marine Division repatriated Japanese military and civilians and Koreans. And I think there were close to 750,000 in North China, in Manchuria. And I was 21 years old at the time. My commanding officer, Carl Felt, was lieutenant commander in the Navy. He developed a plan for repatriating the Japanese and Koreans. And he did a great job. And after about 6 months, he went back to the States. He had enough points to go back to the States. And I was left with the job of repatriation officer in North China at the age of 21. I really was actually, at the age of 22, I was in charge of the whole thing. And it was a wonderful experience. It was a wonderful experience. And I tell the story, it's kind of interesting. After I got back to the States, a few years later, I got a letter from the Marine Corps headquarters. I was receiving China's second highest award for my work repatriating Japanese and Koreans. Aristotle, once again, being in the right place, making good decisions and being lucky. I have a picture in my book. Where's the book? I have a book here. I got a few extra books. It shows a picture of in the Boston Globe, me getting the award. And the funny thing, I didn't expect to get what I was getting. I was go down to the Boston Navy, the Navy in Charlestown, the shipyard, Navy shipyard, and they're going to have a presentation by the Chinese. And I didn't think it was going to be a big deal. I thought I'd go into one of the offices and they'd hand me something. It was bands marching, troops marching, Marines, and then the Chinese executive presented me with my medal. Order of the flying blue cloud, I think it was. But once again, Aristotle. I was running this thing at the age of 22, and just luck. Being in the right place at the right time. The fish market opened in 1950, and the restaurant opened in 1968. And in 1992, my son took over as president of Legal Seafoods. And if you look at him, he's almost as smart as I am. He's better looking. No, but seriously, he's a lot smarter than I am. And when Marja took over, we had 6 restaurants. We now have 34. We now have 34 restaurants since 1992. So, and not only that, but he has some great ideas. If I were still running the business, I would probably have the same, maybe instead of 6 restaurants, I'd probably have 8. Today, he opened up restaurants and everyone is different. And the quality is there. We have a quality control center. We have a laboratory. We check all the shellfish before it goes out. Can't be. Stored for 24 hours. Check if it passes, we sell it. If it doesn't pass, we obviously don't sell it. We check fish for mercury. We do all the things you're supposed to do to protect the consumers. If I'm bragging too much, am I doing too much? No, he says all right, so it's all right. I think it's okay.
It's a commercial.
It's a commercial, he said. No, but we've done this, and Roger is one of the leading forces in that push. And we're so proud of what we're doing. And once again, it couldn't be a better business to be in. And if you have children or grandchildren, my suggestion is let them go to work in a busy restaurant, a good quality restaurant. What they maintain from that, they're used for the rest of their life. I don't care what they're going to be, a doctor, a lawyer, Indian chief. What they gain from that experience makes them a better person. Thank you.
Opening this up for questions. Anybody?
This was a pleasure. So
Thank you.
nice to meet you in all these different ways. I just got my son-in-law a gift certificate from legal this morning. Have you visited our kitchen?
No, I haven't, as a matter of fact.
It would be interesting.
I'd like to do that, and if I could offer any positive advice, I'd love to do that.
Okay, because they do give tours
I know
to
that.
all of us,
I should
so,
do it. We've been,
Just-
since we moved in, we've been running, my wife and I, that's the nature of my marriage.
right.
We almost all run. She keeps me busy.
This
So
is,
we're gonna do it, I'd like to do that.
I happen to know firsthand also that you, as an employer, you are wonderful to your help. You're very caring, even after hours, I know that, and it's
Well-
appreciated.
Well, I think that it's so important, and what it really does for us, it means we get good quality people to come to work for us. They want the same, they want the very best. So it really pays off for us as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
One up here.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. Where do we pick up our discount tickets on the way out?
I can't hear very well, Roger. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Let me start in the front and we'll work our way.
I imagine some people here remember the legal seafoods in Cambridge years and years ago. I will never ever forget being taken there by my mother-in-law, Malcolm's mother, and it was the most amazing experience, not only for us, but of togetherness for the family. And it taught us so much about not only, you know, the food and what have you, but about family togetherness.
Thank
I
you.
will never forget that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi. My husband and I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and so we're very used to Maryland crab. And your crab cakes are the closest to Maryland crab that you can find,
Okay.
and we're very pleased about that. But I have a question about the Sea Bar at Legacy Place. What was the decision to make that into more of a bar atmosphere than the restaurant like at Chestnut Hill?
I think that, and answering for my son, if I'm wrong, you'll correct me, I know that. But it's made, every one of our restaurants is a reflection of what he sees in that area. And some areas are younger people that you want to attract. And if you don't change, if you go to what we had when we first started, you lose the younger people, they're gonna go someplace else. So the reflection you get in Legacy is what they feel will attract good customers and want good qualities.
Okay, thank you.
Sam.
Thank you. I think many of us probably have experiences over the years at one of your restaurants. One experience we had in Inman Square restaurant in the early 70s, we would eat there often with our two kids, and our daughter loved mussels, the mussels that you made there. The problem was that it was too large a portion for a kid. So we complained to your son, and I don't know which son it was at that time. And he made a special children's portion that we were able to get every time we came to Legal Seafood. So thank you.
Well, that's a reflection of Roger. Roger, stand up for a moment. Might as well just. He's a worker here now, and it's my pleasure that he has taken over and doing such a good job.
Another question here.
When is the new legal opening in Chestnut Hill?
2 more weeks. 2 more weeks, yeah. Right after Mother's Day.
That's a new restaurant we're opening up in Chestnut Hill, for you those that don't know. It's next door.
Who asked the question about Baltimore? Who is from Baltimore? All right, I have to tell you, so you grew up in the Baltimore area, I have to tell you the story about the crab cakes. All right, so we were moving into the Washington DC area and we had a crab cake, and it was from, we used Maine crab meat. And it was a good crab cake, but how can you come into the Metro Washington area with a Maine crab cake? You know, if you're from the Chesapeake area, you have to have, you know, a Baltimore, Maryland crab cake. So we went down and we heard that there was a place in Baltimore called the Lexington Market. Okay, now the Lexington Market was kind of a rough and tumble place. You went there during the daytime, you really didn't want to go there at nighttime. And so I had 2 or 3 chefs with us because we heard that there was a place called Failsley's, Failsley's, F-A-I-D-L-E-Y. Anyway, they're supposed to make the best crab cake in the world. And so we went in there, and there's a guy cutting fish, and he looks at us, and because we 2 or 3 people had a chef's uniform on, and he said, "Are you guys here trying to get the crab cake recipe?" And I said, "Look, like it's that obvious." And he said, "Well, there's my wife over there making it." But he said, "I got to tell you, quote, I've been sleeping with the broad for 40 years, and she hasn't told me." So we went over and we sat in front, and she had a little bit of a covering, you know, so we couldn't exactly see what she was doing there. But she said, "Okay, well, if you can figure it out, good luck." And we sat there for 4 hours, and I think we got over 90% of it, and then we embellished a little bit on our own. But that's how we got the crab cake recipe. And the next year, the Washingtonian magazine gave us the best crab cake in the DC area, but it came from Baltimore, so thank you.
Sorry, no, I'm sorry.
Can I ask a question?
Did you, when you were in China, get into Shanghai, which there were a number of Jewish refugees? Shanghai harbor.
No, we never went further south, no, I never. We stayed up in China, we stayed right in Tianjin, never moved up south.
Well, there were 22,000 German refugees and about 500 Polish.
Yeah.
And the Germans were not very nice to the Polish.
And that was the idea, because they were so nice in Tianjin, just the opposite of the way the Japanese treated the Jews in Shanghai. Hard to understand until I heard about this plan that the Japanese had.
I'm sorry, I can't hear very well.
But the plan,
So don't.
until I realized this plan, the Fugo plan, with the Japanese, there were some Japanese that looked in a positive force. The ones in Shanghai obviously didn't look in a positive way to the Jews in southern China.
Okay, back here.
George, I want you to tell how you helped so many of your friends when their kids were graduating from college and couldn't get a job. And you were the place that hired these kids. How'd you do it?
Roger?
No, my father was great, particularly in Chestnut Hill and a little bit in Inman Square, but yeah, in Chestnut Hill, a lot of our guests had kids, and my father would put them right to work in the fish market, bussing tables, and so it's kind of nice now. I run into some of these kids who are now in their 50s and 60s and have great memories.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, the restaurant business. In most businesses, you don't see people that you worked with or you're associated with 30, 40 years ago. I had one fellow that stopped me up at, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and he says, "Mr. Berkowitz," I said, he said, "I worked at Polaroid when we were at Inman Square." And I said, "Oh, yes." We had a lot of people coming from the President Polaroid used to come in. And he said that, "I want to tell you, on Tuesday, you ran a Tuesday special. We had a fish and chip. It was 59 cents. For a penny, you got 2. We did. We didn't know what the hell we were doing, but we did it. It was one of the best things we could have done. What a great ad. He said, I used to come down on Tuesday and get 40 orders. You bring them back to Polaroid and feed 20 of them for the penny. It was a great experience. And how do you talk about these things after all these years? It's just such a nice thing, it really is. We do it with a smile.
You did mention the Jewish population in Japan. A few years ago, Protocol of the Elders of Zion was a best-selling book in Japan.
Which one?
And no one could understand it because there were so few Jewish people in Japan. This is within the past 10 years.
That may be so, but there were Japanese that looked in a positive way for the Jews. That may have been people who wanted to read about it. I think that's probably the reason for it. But I don't think many of us sitting here realized that there were Japanese that lived in Japan during the war. That was their home. It wasn't a question of there for the day, a week, or a month. They lived there. And that's what I said when I read it. If you want to get a book, The Frugal Plan, you want good reading, try it.
I have a question. I was attending college in Cambridge, no, not at Harvard. In the 1980 January, I was doing an internship outside of Inman Square, and unfortunately had the displeasure of going by the Inman Square Legal Seafood as the firefighters in Cambridge were continuing to put the fire out. Why did you never rebuild Inman Square?
Well, actually, it actually might be a fun story. I'll tell you why we did it in a minute. But, we had the fire in Inman Square. Would anyone, sort of be curious to hear about the fire?
Give him the mic.
So what happened was, and it sort of starts back to kind of an interesting story about the people that you meet in the restaurant. And there was a fellow that moved in across the street from the restaurant. He was a painter by the name of Hyman Bloom. Okay? And Hyman used to come into the restaurant every day for lunch and dinner. And the reason was he liked fish, but he had a cardiologist, Al Freeberg, who told him that if he had fish, it would be great for his cholesterol. And this is before Lipitor and all these other statins came out. So Hyman would come in every day, and he
Twice a day. Twice a day.
Twice a day. And he and my father became very friendly. And at one point, my father asked him if he could utilize, if he needed more space for a studio. And Hyman said, yeah, I could actually. So my father said, what? We have space upstairs. And so for 3 or 4 years, Hyman used the upstairs as a studio. And I don't know if you've seen some, in fact, it's in the book. You have a little booklet there that might be available to take. But there's a picture of fish, and sort of skeletal pictures of fish in sort of a vortex. And Hyman calls that one sort of the law of nature, big fish eating little fish. But he used to come down to the fish market at nighttime and take the fish frames and use them as a medium to paint with. So anyway, Hyman painted up there for 4 years, and then he was using upstairs just for storing the paintings. And at a certain point, and if you know of Hyman's work, he's sort of mystical, I guess, and sort of not quite supernatural, but the paintings have sort of a mystical air about them. Anyway, fast forward a few years, I think it was 1980 when you were there, and you were in Chestnut Hill, and I was in Inman Square, and I asked Hyman if it was all right if I moved some of his paintings over. They were in the upper level. And Hyman said, sure, not a problem. And 2 days before he was to move the paintings, he said, I'm going to move the paintings out. I said, I thought I had insulted him. I said, you don't have to take the paintings out. He goes, no, it's fine. So he moved the paintings out. 2 days later, we had the fire in Inman Square. And had he not moved those paintings, much of his life's work would have been gone. And when I saw him there at the fire that night, I said, I can't believe you moved the paintings out. He said, my wife had a dream, she saw them going up in flames. She made me take them out.
Wow.
So I said, do me a favor, share the dream next time. But, so, and actually, so just to sort of fast forward, the last painting that I got a call from Stella, Hyman's wife. He said, Hyman wants you to buy the last painting that was out before the fire. And so we actually have that at our offices in Boston. It's sort of, but the way the fire started, it was kind of interesting. It was one of these odd things that we had and how do you know how a fire starts? It was right across the street from the firehouse, and so they was really concerned, and they started questioning you, they started questioning me how that was possible. What happened was, I think that you pointed this out, we had a camera system, a security camera system in place, and ordinarily it would have shut off, but it just could have ran continuously on a loop. And what happened was, it was upstairs actually, in the offices, and this was one area that the fire didn't get to. And so we went back and reconstructed exactly what happened in 15-second intervals. And what happened is, it showed the nighttime cleaning crew taking a milk crate and putting it up on a stove. We had just had that area renovated, and there was no building, right, from the early 1900s that my grandfather had, and it was a very drafty building. And what happened is, once the milk crate was on the stove, the pilot light, it was a gas pilot light, and the wind fanned it back and forth. Attached to the milk crate was a piece of cellophane. And we saw the cellophane ignite and catch fire, and then fall onto the floor, and then go up the wall.
The fire department said it was the first time they've ever seen a fire start. First time.
Yeah, and that was it. But why we're not back, we went to go back there. The city of Cambridge would always accuse us of causing traffic problems in Inman Square, and we just couldn't, it just didn't make sense for us to stay at that point, so that's when we ended up moving up the street into Kendall Square. That's the fire story.
More questions? Thank you.
So this is really just a comment, but my parents were kosher, and my father was particularly kosher and concerned, and rarely did my parents go to a restaurant, but they loved going to Inman Square because there was fresh fish, paper plates, and plastic forks. And so how could it be more kosher than that?
It wasn't planned that way, but it worked out that way. That's very nice. That's nice to hear it.
Phyllis, depends upon the pan that you cook it in.
Broiled, only broiled.
One reads today a lot about the pollution in the oceans of stocks of fish being depleted, government regulation limited catches, and I've noticed over the last few years, new species of fish are now being sold I never heard of before. Have you given any thought to this in the future, and any ideas of how you can overcome some of these limitations on fish supply?
Well, Roger, on top of the lavatory, that's one of the reasons we work the lavatory. We check all the shellfish, and as I say, we don't sell it for 24 hours to protect. I eat a lot of shellfish, so they take good care of me.
One of the issues with species of fish, and there was perhaps some overfishing in the 80s that everyone is aware of, but processes and quotas and moratoriums were put into place to bring the stocks back. In some cases, they came back. The issue that we're really having out there now has less to do with pollution and has less to do with overfishing. It has to do with climate change. And what's happening is, in our discussions with NOAA scientists and meteorologists right now, several years ago they thought that the changing of the water temperatures were going to rise between 4 and 6 degrees over an 80-year period of time. And what's happened is they made a mistake. It's actually rising much faster. It really has risen 4 to 6 degrees over a 10-year period of time. When that happens, you see an increase in storm activity. So Hurricane Sandy, that wasn't an anomaly, that was the beginning. And you saw storms this past year with surges coming up. That was something that's now going to continue. In terms of the different species that are coming up, what's happening, the traditional cold water fish are migrating further north into colder water. So it's not necessarily there's less fish or they're being depleted, they're just seeking out colder water. So there is more fish, as an example, in Canada today than there has been in the last 10 years. If you go to Iceland, they are having record catches right now. The waters are cold and it's a well-managed fishery. Some of the unique stocks coming up, fishermen are starting to see mahi-mahi, which is, you know, the dolphin fish, which is traditionally from Florida up to the mid-Atlantic. They're starting to see that off of Cape Cod right now. There are fish called croaker, you know, which is a southern fish. That's not a New England fish. They're starting to migrate into these waters now. So you have a lot of black sea bass, which is traditionally mid-Atlantic. These are fish that are coming into the waters now. So that's really why you're seeing a lot of different species. It has to do with climate change.
More questions?
Now that, my wife is waiting for me.
Wow. Thank you so much. It was an